We've got one more speaker before we go to break. If you guys keep standing while we do the intro for Scott here. Scott is an incredible guy. Scott Chacon is CIO of Github. His Twitter handle, by the way, guys, for his presentation is at CHACONE if you want to tweet him questions. For those of you who don't know who Scott is, he's actually a Git evangelist and a Ruby developer. He authored the book ProGit and the Git internals peep code PDF. Maintains the Git homepage and the community book. And what's interesting, he actually describes himself as a software developer, world traveler, father, husband, cat rescuer, baby signer, and gorilla tamer. And if that's not impressive enough, frankly, he's actually ran for Congress in California. And if we're lucky, he may do an ET impersonation. So today, right now, Scott is the CIO of GitHub, the largest code host in the world. Let's give a warm Kansas City welcome to Scott.
Thank you, sir. It's highly unlikely that I will do my ET impersonation, but I did run for Congress, and I was curious how they found that out. I try not to tell people. All right, let's see if I can get my computer to turn on, and we'll get this started. There we go. So how you guys doing? It is impossible to see you, just so you know. There's a spotlight directly on me, so if anybody is having a really bad time and giving me thumbs down and stuff, I'm just not going to be able to see it. All right. Do we have the... All right. So, my talk is about the future of work. This is something that's really interesting to me. It's something that we have had to pay more and more attention to as GitHub has gotten bigger. And it's been something where, in the early days of GitHub, I was a Ruby developer. I did a lot of the really early work at GitHub 4 years ago. Now we're 130 people now. And we've hired people that are way too smart to allow me to touch the code base anymore. So I don't actually get to do anything in that area very much anymore. But I do get to sort of help run the business and think about the business, and it is an interesting thing to me. So I'm Scott Chacon, and this talk is going to be about imagining the future. That's the sort of theme of the conference, is imagining the future. But in order to imagine the future, first I want to go back and remember the past a little bit, at the risk of sort of going over a little bit of the same territory that Dan did in the beginning. So I want to tell you a story. So the other day, I was reading a paperback book that I had just bought from Borders when my girlfriend paged me. I checked my wristwatch and realized that I had to deposit a check at the bank. I went to payphone to call a cab and waited 30 minutes with nothing to do until the cab arrived. After the bank, I stopped by Blockbuster Video to rent a VHS movie they had in stock and used the cash in my wallet to pay. Sadly, I got lost on my way home, but I did see a great sunset, which I took a picture of with my film camera that I'd get developed later so I could put it in a scrapbook to show friends and family. When I got home, I opened the doors with my keys, and I found I'd been mailed a physical bill. I opened my phone book to find a restaurant to eat at that night, but nothing looked good, so I just cooked for myself. I listened to the radio for a while, and then I called my mom, but I could only talk for a minute because it was an international call. So, how long ago was this? This was the last tech boom, right? This is when technology companies were huge. This is when, Netscape was IPOing. This is when everything was worth a ton of money, and this was the last sort of boom in tech. And, oh, you kind of cut off the beginning. You can see most of it. That's fine. So, since then, what has happened, right? What has happened in the 12 years since then? What has happened since I was in college? The story actually seemed legitimate, right? Nobody would do half of this stuff anymore. What happened is that software is eating the world. That software is replacing all of the industries, almost all of the industries that we know of, and it's doing it at a relatively rapid pace because of the technology that we have now and the connectedness that everybody has. So I want to go back through this story real fast and just think about what has replaced these things, right? I was reading a paperback book that I bought from Borders when my girlfriend paged me. I checked my wristwatch, realized that I had to deposit a check at the bank, called a payphone, or I used a payphone to call a cab. Does anybody use Uber? There's no Uber in Kansas City yet, right? One person uses Uber. Taxi Magic. I had nothing to do until the cab arrived. After the bank, I stopped by Blockbuster Video to rent a movie, and I used the cash in my wallet. Sadly, I got lost on my way home, but I saw a great sunset, which I took a picture of. I gave it to develop later and put it in a scrapbook. When I got home, I opened the doors with my keys, and I found I'd been mailed a bill. I opened the phone book to find a restaurant to eat at that night, but nothing looked good, so I just cooked for myself. I listened to the radio, and I called my mom, and it was an international call. So all of the things that I used to do, God, you can't see a lot of those. I put a lot of work into that, too. All of those things that I used to do, in all of those ways, now I use this for, right? Or now I use the internet for. Now all of these industries, I mean, this is just an example of some apps that I have that I use all the time, but the larger picture is that these industries have been changed fundamentally. They've been totally disrupted, right? The things that I'm pissed off about from this, what I take from this, is that I still have a wallet and I still have keys, right? I feel like this is wasteful. This is stupid. I should not have to do this. I should be able to leave my house and open the door with my phone, and I should be able to pay with things with my phone. There's no reason for me to be carrying these things around. They seem archaic, right? And also I forget them a lot, and that makes me sad too. So this is a sort of quote from Mark Andreessen: software companies are poised to take over large swaths of the economy, and we're seeing it all over the place. If you think about this, right, if you think about all of these different industries that have been taken over, they're huge industries. The publishing industry, right? Barnes & Nobles, Borders, everything's going out of business. The movie industry, the photography industry, when was the last time you developed film, right? The restaurant industry, the media industry, direct marketing, right? All of these things are vastly changed by the software that has been developed in the last 5 or 10 years. And the reason why is a couple of different reasons why. Since the last tech boom, there have been some huge changes. One is we're larger and more connected in this world, right? The amount of people that have access to broadband, the amount of people that have access to something that can run software on their person and is connected to everybody else at all times is vastly different than it was 5 years ago. It's vastly different than it was 10 years ago. And so it forces us to rethink all of the things that we do on a daily basis, to think about what our daily lives are and how, if that is working well for us, if that is actually the best possible outcome for that thing, and if there's any way for software to solve that problem, because now we're in a position to do it that we weren't in a position to even a few years ago. And the second part is that it's cheaper and faster. So this is what, Instructables, this is what Box, this is what GitHub, Heroku, Azure, right? All of these things make it cheaper and faster to deploy. I had a conversation with somebody the other day that was a good Rails developer, but was very young. And he's a really good Rails developer, but he was saying that he was setting up a Linux server so that he could see what it was like to actually run a web service, because he had never run his own web server before. He'd pushed to Heroku. He had, the platform had been totally commoditized, and it was just not it was magic that he just didn't care about. It's like us, somebody trying to build their own computer. That doesn't really happen very much anymore. It's not practical to do, right? Running your own infrastructure, it's more of an interesting hobby thing to say, oh, look, I'm running Apache, instead of, just pushing to Heroku and letting them deal with all of that stuff. It's cheaper, it's faster, you can get stuff out to market faster and see if it's actually worthwhile, if it's solving people's problems or not. So imagining the future is about going back to first principles and figuring out what the best possible way of doing something is, and then asking yourself, can software do that now, right? As opposed to cargo culting whatever came before, or making tiny changes. This is a thing that we do at GitHub all the time, all over the company, is to look at anything that frustrates us and say, let's go back to first principles. First principles are basic foundational propositions, right? There's something you can't get more basic than. So what are the first principles of this problem that I'm trying to solve? And in a perfect world, how would that problem be solved, right? In a perfect world, a wallet would not be necessary, right? As a minor thing, as a minor frustration, right? I've left my wallet on my desk and stuff before. I always have my phone on me because, it's my wristwatch, it's my map, it's my text message, it's everything that I need on a minute-to-minute basis. I'll leave my wallet on my desk when I go to the bathroom, but what am I going to do in the bathroom if I don't have my phone? So, I'll always have that on me, right? So, go back to the root of whatever problems that are frustrating you and say, what should this be like? And then, is it possible? Because now, even in the last few years, more and more so, the answer is yes. It's actually probably pretty easy to do this, right? To solve this problem in some way. So, reimagining everything. That's the future, right? Is reimagining all of these things that we've taken for granted for a long time and saying, what would the best possible thing be, and why don't we do that instead of whatever we're doing now? Richard Branson says, all startups should be thinking about what frustrates me, my wallet frustrates me, my keys frustrate me, as simple examples of something that, could possibly be products. But there's a lot of other things. I wrote a book, so they were saying that I wrote a book. The entire publishing process from an author standpoint is awful. Has anybody written a book, has anybody published a book in the audience? It's basically the worst thing that you could imagine. It's so maddening. You have to do it like in Microsoft Word, and that by itself is awful. There's no way to merge documents. It's like, it's like doing stuff with anything with lawyers, actually Microsoft Word really is the problem here. But I mean, it comes down to that, right? What frustrates you? Identify points of friction, identify your frustrations, and say why, be easily frustrated, right? If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to be a tech leader, if you want to build a business that's going to be wildly successful, you have to be really sort of an asshole. You need to say, how come it's like this? And, you're just super frustrated at everything. And it really annoys, my wife, for example, because I do it all the time. I'm like, fucking keys, fuck them. But it's what you need to focus on. It's what you need to have a game with other people that you're working with or your friends or something. When you get in a cab and go somewhere, have conversations. Be like, these are all of the things that I find frustrating in my life because those are all good business ideas, right? Those are all the things that we need to figure out. How can software, how can having everybody have a tiny, powerful computer in their pocket that's connected to the world, how can those things solve that problem, right? So, that's for you guys. That's for the hackathon tomorrow. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that going forward. What frustrates me? How can this new world that we're in solve that? But for now, I want to do sort of a thought exercise to start going through this with you so you get an idea of what we think about, right? How we approach product. But instead of product, because I don't want you to compete with us, I'm going to say work, right? I want to look at work because you spend tons of time, half of your waking life probably at work, right? Everybody in this room does. You spend a ton of time at work. I'm sure there are tons of frustrations there, but if you look about the history of work, right? If you look about what workplaces have been like over time, from job to job to job, what are the similarities and why are they similarities? Why are these things still the same ways that they are? So everybody in this room probably has different places that they work in, different work environments, and that's great. So some of this stuff will make sense and some of it won't. A lot of this is born out of where everybody at GitHub, the first founders of GitHub, where we all worked before, and us looking at those things and saying, why is it this way? So I want to go through this as an exercise to start questioning things, to start looking at things in your daily life, identifying frustrations and questioning them, and saying, is it this way because everybody else does it this way? Am I cargo culting my job, or is it this way because there's a really good reason? So first off, meetings, right? Why do you have meetings? Right? This is a really fundamental question that not a lot of people ask. Is it to exchange information? Is it to make decisions? Is it to come to consensus? Right? There are a lot of different reasons that people schedule meetings and people want to have meetings, but nobody really thinks about, or not very many people, I feel, really think about what they're trying to accomplish with the meetings. You go back to first principles. What are those things you're trying to do? And ask yourself, is there better ways of doing these things? Is there better ways of coming to consensus, right? Can you use an app to put out a question and have everybody vote on it asynchronously and come to some sort of consensus? Is it to come up with good ideas? Can you have people, have email ideas into an application and have everybody talk about them and discuss them asynchronously over the course of time, right? Is it to communicate with people in some other ways? Is it to have FaceTime with people, right? Is it just to get to know people and talk to them? And then if that's the case, do you need to do it in a business context, or should you just set up sort of corporate dinners every once in a while and drink with people and get to know them that way, right? What is the point of the meeting, and are you getting it done by having them, right? So a lot of people will address this with like, we'll have less people at the meetings, or we'll make sure that the meetings are 30 minutes hard line or something. But is that really solving the problem? Is the problem the amount of time, or is the problem the meeting itself, right? Cubicles are interesting. So your work environment, this really stands for your entire work environment. How do you work? Do you work, is your area at home, if you've built up a desk at home, or say you do art or something different, that workspace, is that the same that you are given when you go to work, right? Is it basically the same thing? Or are they optimized differently because you have total control over one and the company tells you how to do the other one, right? Is cubicles a useful thing? Are offices better? Is an open space better? Is a cafe better, right? What are they all good for different things? Should you be spending an hour or two per day in each one of these locations, like in a darkened chair in a room with headphones on, and some in open space, and some in sort of common space, and some in a beanbag chair in a room? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with your office space or with your work environment? And is the way that you're setting up your company useful for that? And I'm coming at this from the perspective that a lot of you guys probably are going to run businesses someday because you're obviously interested in technology. You're going to do a hackathon tomorrow, and you're going to come up with a great idea, and you're going to try to productize it and build a business. So you need to think about, how do you run that business? Is it really the best way to run a business? Hours are another thing. I don't know if everybody still does sort of 8 to 5 stuff. This is common in some places and common in others. 8 to 8 or 8 to 10 is probably in the tech industry more common in some places, having really long hours or something. But do hours matter at all? Should they make any difference at all? Does your boss care if you go home at 3 o'clock, right? Do you have a boss that notices that? Does anybody notice? Is it important when you spend time in the office, or do people just trust that you're a tech person, you're a knowledge worker, you bring your own device to work, you could go home, you still have your computer, you still have your iPhone, you can still do the work that you do at work, right? So do people trust you to say, come in whenever you want, work whenever you want, take days off whenever you want them? It doesn't really matter. As long as at the end of the month you're getting your work done and you're collaborating with people, then that's the only thing that makes a difference, right? Is that question being asked at all, or is it you need to be button seats, right? This is an important thing to see you at your terminal for some reason. Offices themselves, like I was saying, the first year and a half or so, 2 years of GitHub, we operated entirely out of cafes. So until we were probably 9 employees and had hundreds of thousands of customers, we did not have an office. So we had co-location facilities, stuff, we had all of our computers were hosted elsewhere, but we worked out of cafes and we worked out of our home, and we finally got an office when we decided that we just wanted to stop paying individually for coffees. So we got an office, set it up like a cafe, and then put a coffee machine in it, and beer, and now that was more useful to us, right? But nobody had assigned seating. It was actually one big long table to begin with, and then a bar, and then a coffee machine, and that's all we had. And it worked great, right? And our new office is, it's been a progression of that. But that, I want you to think about what the function of an office is from first principles. Like, don't even listen to me and what ours is or used to be like. Think about it from yourself. What do you need an office for? Do you need an office at all? If you do, from first principles, from foundational principles, what are you trying to solve with the office, and is it actually accomplishing that or not, right? Do you have the right types of space? Do you have the right types of environments? Do you have the right policies on when people can and can't be in the office? Management. So probably a number of you are managers. I see a lot of collared shirts. So I don't want to piss you off, but is management necessary, right? What are the functions of managers? What are the things that they do, right? They help to hire. They help to communicate within the company. They help to organize work. They help to, largely communicate both up and down, right? To let people know what the vision of the company is, and then also let the people at the top that are making the larger decisions know what the people that are actually working with customers or working on the software think about stuff. So facilitating communication. So think about those roles and say, are there better ways of accomplishing these roles, right? Can I write software that does a lot of the different functions of management? Or can I write software that delegates the functions of management more evenly across the company, right? So that instead of having one director and 10 engineers, you have 11 people with 1/11 of an engineer or of a director sort of role, right? That they do more self-management or self-direction. Or you give a general goal to a group of people and they all figure out, maybe some people take slightly more leadership roles and some people don't want to do that at all, right? And maybe that changes every month. Is that a possibility? Is that a way that is more efficient from first principles to accomplish what you're trying to do, right, with the running of an organization? Hiring process. So a lot of people will do phone screens and they'll bring people in for 4 hours or something like that, and then they'll do thumbs up and thumbs down, like I don't know. I assume most hiring processes are the same. This is something we still struggle at GitHub, is to try to figure this out, because you really don't want turnover, right? It's expensive to hire, especially tech people. You don't want turnover, but the question is, what are you doing say you're spending 8 hours per person that you're interviewing to decide whether or not you want to hire them before you offer them a job. Let's say it's 8 hours. It's probably maybe a little bit high, maybe about right. Is what you're doing in that 8-hour amount of time selecting for the things that are actually useful when that person comes in and works in your company, right? Because I think that most people don't ask that. They want to be able to have a yes-no decision, right? We gave them these technical problems on a whiteboard, and they couldn't solve this technical problem over here. This other person could, so that makes it very easy, a very easy binary decision. We'll hire this person, right? But is solving problems on a whiteboard anything that you've ever had to do in a time-sensitive situation in your programming careers, right? Is that ever anything that is necessary for a company to succeed? Right? And so, I mean, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's phone screens. But when was the last time that you were like, shit, I need to get this code into production, call Bob, and start telling him exactly how to implement it, because all he knows how to do is type, and then he'll do it and deploy it to the server. Like, if that were a problem set, then phone screens would be a really good way of finding people that could do well in that situation, right? But I don't think that that's true. I hope it's not true. Maybe it is. I'd actually love to talk to you if that's true. Just see what's happening there. But are you hiring for the right things, right? Is your hiring process selecting for the right things? Vacation time, sick time, do you need it at all, right? How many people have 10 days or 3 weeks of vacation time? Just about everybody, okay? So do you need vacation time? What is the point of setting a limit on vacation time, right? People in Europe have 6 weeks. I mean, in certain countries in Europe, some other places have 4. We have like 3 basically in the United States, or like 2 plus like a week of sick time, which is fantastic, because you're like, if you're sick for more than 5 days, just come into the office and spread the germs here, because that's going to be really good for the rest of the company, right? And so instead, what a lot of companies will do is flex time. So you're like, you know what? If you're sick for 6 days, just go ahead and take one of your vacation days, which is fantastic. That's really good for morale. So, ask yourself, what is the point? Are you afraid that your employees are just going to go unlimited vacation time, fuck you, and like fly off to Hawaii and not do any work, right? Which is fine, but if you don't trust your employee to not make decisions of that caliber, then they probably shouldn't be working for your company, right? Like, no, any other decisions that they're making it's not going to be helpful to you. So, some companies, I really don't want to talk specifically about GitHub in any of these instances, because what I don't want you to do is say, I'm going to do what GitHub does. What I want you to do is think about these things and come up with your own and test them out, and then, a year from now, tell me what you did and how it's working, because I want to improve our processes, right? I don't want you to copy anything that we're doing. I want you to think about these things, because again, this is a lot of these things are possible in the last few years. So I want a lot of people to try out stuff and share good ideas and incorporate that, because that should not be a hiring advantage, right? We do think through a lot of these things. We do interesting things in a lot of these areas, and we can steal people from company that have more rigid guidelines on a lot of this stuff into a company that they feel more open at. So it is actually a hiring advantage of GitHub right now that we are doing this, right? And so if anything, this is a horrible idea for me to talk to you about, because now I'm just empowering you to compete with us on employees better. But I think it's interesting, and I think it's better for the economy, for one, and for the entire profession, right? That there's no reason that knowledge workers need to work the same way that factory workers did, and we still hold over a lot of those things for no particular reason. Long hours is something new, right? Factory workers did not have to work long hours after, they passed laws and stuff. But we do, right? We're not protected that way. And so like a lot of times, companies will be like, I talk fast, I think fast, I drink fast, I code fast. If you're not here until the wee hours of the night, you're a piece of shit. So don't do that. That's stupid, because then people don't do good code. People can do a lot of work, and if you make them do a lot of work, guess what? They're going to have to do a lot more work to fix the shitty work that they did when they were tired. So, you know, and you lose out on a lot of stuff too. Things like setting specific times you need to be in the office. Things like telling, you know, sort of insinuating that people have to work long hours or they're not valuable. These are things that make it difficult to hire people with kids, that make it tough to hire people with dependents of various types, where they want to go to a play, or they want to pick them up for school, or they want to have a flexible schedule, or they want to be able to take a week off to go do something, or they need to be home, right, for their spouses or their children. And you can't hire those. It makes it difficult to hire those people if you're doing this. You're just going to get snot-nosed kids out of high school or out of college, and that's fine. Maybe that's what you want to do. But I mean, ask yourself, is that what you're trying to do? Or are you trying to do it because you think you're now like the Marine of programming, right? Like you have to be tough to do this, because that's stupid. There's no good reason for that. Expense reports, again, do you need to have, I mean, there are some laws here that you just can't really reinvent, but for accounting purposes, but there are interesting things that you can do here, like letting people take pictures of the receipts, or having a larger per diem on stuff, like as long as it's within accounting guidelines. Again, it comes back to trust. A fantastic example, it's something that we're not doing, but I kind of like to, is giving all of the employees, every employee, a corporate credit card, right? If you're doing something, if you need software, if you need to procure something, if you need to, sponsor some drinks for a client or something like that, something to surprise and delight, just do it and expense it, and if it's bad, then we'll tell you after the fact. If they're doing something like, buying heroin for their 15 friends, and it's like hundreds of dollars, I obviously don't know how much heroin costs, but like, say it's $2,000 or something like that, and you're like, oh God, it cost us $2,000 because we trusted our employees and this person fucked it up. Well, guess what? Like, how much money would you pay to know that you had an employee that you couldn't trust to that level, right? Would you pay $2,000 to know which employee that was? Because I would, right? I'd be more than happy to say, great, it cost us $2,000, and now we know that we can't trust them and they're a bad person, so we can let them go and have grounds for it, and that's fine. So, what is why don't you give credit cards to everybody? What is your level of trust with your employees, and why is it there, right? Sales process is another interesting thing. Can I get like a light or something at like 10 minutes? I have no idea how much time I have. Sales process, commissions, right? Or the sales. Actually, I want to talk about commissions. Commissions are really interesting to me. Commissions and bonuses, right? How many of you work in a company with a sales organization or are salespeople? Okay, a number of people. Don't worry, I'm not going to yell at you. So sales is really interesting to me, because these tools, where you wouldn't think that this has changed the sales process that much, have actually still changed the sales process a lot. Having access to information, having a lot of information online, having people, be able to test out products and stuff, it makes hard sales not as much of a thing as it needed to be in the past, right? You don't need to go, unless you're working with the military or some huge country, like you don't need, for Box or something, they don't necessarily need to go in and hard sell people on stuff. They need to let people try it, want to use it or start using it internally anyways, and then facilitate that process of having the customer be successful, right, in engaging with your product and using your product. So it's almost more, instead of sales, can you do marketing and really good customer support, right? Can that take over the same functions that sales used to do? Commissions are interesting because even if you do have salespeople, let's say you do have salespeople, you have a complex product, you want people to go out to be able to talk to the customers on a normal level. So let's say that you do. How do you pay them, right? Almost every sales organization has, half base, half commission or something like that. And it's this carrot, and you're like, if you do really, really, really well, then you can get the other half of your salary as well, right? Instead of doing, say, 50,000 base and 50,000 comp, why don't you just say, here's 100 grand, do a really good job and make all of your customers happy? Because that solves a lot of problems. You don't have to deal with people fighting over regions, or saying whose customer is who, or a $50 million deal comes in and everybody's jockeying for position on it. You don't have to have sales managers that figure out what all of the commissions are at the end, and all your salespeople make the same amount of money anyways, right? They have less stress. These are people, talking to your customers. Why do you want them to be the most stressed out people in your organization? So think about commission. Think about do I really think that the human beings that I have hired to be in my organization are so fucking lazy that if I didn't say you won't get half your money unless you do your job, then they won't do it, right? If that's the case, why don't you do that for your programmers too, right? If you don't merge 57 pull requests per year, you don't get all of your money. We're basing that on a contingency, and you have to ship 4 products, or you only get half your salary. If it doesn't make sense, and I feel like it doesn't make sense, then why does it make sense for sales? Why do they have to be incentivized? That's in their own best interest and not the best interest of the general company like everybody else in the company is. And that goes for bonuses too, right? At the end of the year, do you really want people, like, do you have to incentivize them outside of the general purpose of the company? Is that where their motivation, is that where human motivation that's powerful truly lies? In personal monetary self-interest? Or can you give purpose, you know, autonomy to a person and say, this is what's interesting, do interesting things, we'll pay you a base salary, we'll pay you enough so you don't have to worry about sort of making rent and stuff, but do a really good job, right? That is the creative worker. And then finally, IT. So this is something that Dan was talking about a lot as well, which is IT. So I feel like, I agree with him. I think that having a server room in 10 years is going to be like having a room that you have a cow in so that your employees can milk it for their coffee. Like, it's like, yes, technically you can do that, but does it really make sense? Like, it's not efficient, right? That should be a commodity. So ask yourself, can software consume and make better offices, right? Can you replace an office with a chat room and with collaborative software and with home offices and with plane tickets, you know, every couple of months to get everybody together and meet each other and do FaceTime? Or do you really need to have an office? Or can you improve your existing office with software? Can you write software that eats sales, right? That changes the sales process, that makes it so the salespeople are part of the organization the same way that everybody else is? Can you write software that eats IT? Can you replace your file systems and your code hosting and your have everybody bring their own devices to work? Like, can software solve IT instead of having to have a huge IT department? And can software eat your boss, right? Can you take the functions of the, and I'm not saying fire all managers, like I'm saying let them do more interesting things. Let them do more business development things. Let them do more external relations things. Let them do more, deal with fucking lawyers or like stuff that you don't want to have to deal with, right? Like, there's smart people in any organization who can find interesting things to do. It's when they feel constrained by where they need to get in the company, like what level of title they need to get, or what level, of who reports to them. Like, when you have those things in your organization, it's toxic because it makes people be interested in that artificially rather than just trying to do interesting things and make the company a better place, make the product a better thing. So software can help provide guidance and to provide structure to enable those things instead of what we're doing now. So that's what I see as the work of tomorrow. I'm almost out of time. What I want to do is set up another interesting sort of thought exercise, which is, say the work of tomorrow. Say you have a company with no office hours, with no meetings, with that's not, you can't take a vacation, but like, sort of unlimited vacations, no assignments, no managers. You have a whole bunch of smart people in a company and a united purpose, right? What is that, right? What software company works like that? And the interesting answer is that almost all of you are using software that was written in this manner, and it wasn't a company, it was open source, right? Open source runs this way. You have thousands of people writing the Linux kernel, writing Apache server, writing shit that you all totally depend on, except for the people that are using Azure, that you all totally depend on to run your businesses, that help facilitate a lot of this stuff. And all of that software was written in this manner, right? It was written without any of these constraints. That's how these communities formed. That's how the software got written. There's no bosses. Linus is not telling people what features to put in next. He's moderating, right? Can your bosses be moderators? Is that just think about it. Think about how open source software is developed, what is interesting, what is different from how you develop software, and why that is, and if you can take any lessons from it. Because it's an interesting market that you can analyze as a software development community. So, change constantly, think about these things, play around with them in your companies. Tell me what works and what doesn't work. I would love to hear from you. It's Scott at Github. Just tell me, and I'd be happy to share with you, show you around my office and stuff and tell you how we do things. But I want to have this conversation, right? I want to have people in this industry thinking about this, because otherwise it is hugely wasteful. One last thing before before I assume that they're just going to run up and tackle me. Rise of the network. So this is an interesting quote from Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Built to Last, and a couple of really sort of interesting business books that we can debate whether they're right or wrong or whatever. Mark Andreessen fucking hates this guy, but are we streaming this? Well, anyways. I'm just kidding. I was kidding, Jim. No, but I mean, I know people who disagree with some of the offended, but I think this is an interesting quote. We may be moving to a world of networks well-led as opposed to organizations well-managed, right? So think about the change in relationships, in consumer products, in the relationships that people have in Twitter and Facebook. Think about if we bring that into our organization at a fundamental level, right? Can we change the fundamental nature of a business, of an organization, to being a network of smart people that are led well rather than a hierarchy that's managed specifically, right, or managed well? So well-led networks built on first principles, that is my vision of what the future of work is. So thank you very much.
Scott, we actually have time for probably one or two questions from the audience.
Oh, we have a lot. How about right here?
Do you think it's possible to have an organization without leadership at all, where it's completely collaborative on one level, or do you think there will always have to be some kind of leader pushing it in this direction?
So can there be an organization with no leadership? I think that is possible. That's not how GitHub runs, so I can't do that specifically from experience. What I know is that we don't entitle people. So we try very hard. We don't have a manager of something or director of something. Or we did have directors. We're trying to figure out if that's still like a thing. But people don't really report to them. What happens is people sort of arise naturally and then step back down when they get burnt out, or then they don't like it anymore and they want to get back to code or something like that. So I think it can be fluid or dynamic, like leadership in an organization, very easily, as people move around to whatever they're most interested in. And sometimes that's leadership, and sometimes that's more of a management communication type position, and some of it's sometimes it's I just want to go back to pure programming, right? And as long as people don't feel like they are getting demoted by focusing on product or focusing on coding or ops or something rather than like leading, then I think that it's very easy to do, and I think it's very powerful in an organization to let people do that so they don't get burnt out or tired of something. On a larger thing, open source is a great example of that, where there really are not titled leaders, right? I mean, Linus started the Git project, for example, and made a good base for it, and then kind of got tired of it, and Junio took over and has been running it very well for a long time, and has sort of, other people that he will choose to sort of, when he goes on vacation for a couple weeks, to keep running the project. Like, there's a network of trust there, right? Somebody new can't do that. Like you could bring in a CTO or like a hired CTO or something, and be like, this dude's in charge of all of you now. Like, open source cannot fundamentally work that way, which I think is really interesting. So, thing to look at. There was another question. Yeah. Pro Git. It's an A-Press book. It's Creative Commons license, so if you go to gitsem.com, like the main Git website, it's actually the content of the book. There's like a book tab, and that's my book. Is everything on that website. It used to be a separate website. I merged it together so it was sort of act as the documentation for Git, but it's open source. The A-Press let me Creative Commons license, so you can get the markdown of the entire book online and modify it and translate it and stuff like that, which is another really interesting sort of thing. So that's probably all the time I have time for, but GitHub is sponsoring the after party tonight, so please everybody do come and wait until I've had maybe one beer, and then I will talk your ears off about any of this. And then the later in the night, the more sort of demonstrative and violent I get. So, so I hope to see you all there, and I really would love to talk to all of you about this at some point. So thank you very much.
Let's give it up for Scott.
Everybody, clap your hands. Come on, y'all.
Thanks.